Yeah,
Did you
call
say you're
that
going to
shit
tit
out.
slap her?
No, I said you find somebody else to slap her, not you. But yeah,
I thought you said I'm going to tit slap
no, you don't. You don't let her get away with
what
it.
the fuck?
No.
Remember when we first met John McClane? Argyle picked him up from the plane and took him down the Nakatomi Tower at the Christmas party. And the terrorists were overzealous, but it was sweet when they killed Ellis. And with a little help from Alan, John McClane kicked ass.
Welcome back to Chat the Movies, the podcast where we answer the question, were the movies we loved when we were growing up really that good? Have you ever caught yourself thinking, why don't they make movies like they used to? Can you still remember spending your Friday night searching for the perfect movie rental at Blockbuster Video? Do you know what Blockbuster Video is? If you answered yes, and this is the podcast for you, I'm one of your hosts, Gene Lyons, and alongside me are my co-hosts, Ash, keep your fingers out of my soup, O'Driscoll.
Hi, y'all.
And Big D, Dick Ebert.
Good evening.
And each week we take a look back in time and decide if our favorite films still hold up. The movies we cover are chosen by you, the listeners, who generously commission the films you love. If you'd like to see all the movies we have covered, will cover, want to choose one for yourself, please visit shatpod.com and have a look. At the end of each podcast, we'll provide you, the audience, with the number of wipes each movie would take to get off your respective butts. So thank you so much for listening. If you have not already, hit that subscribe button and share with a friend. It's how we help the podcast grow. Additionally, subscribe to our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Westworld, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, True Detective, Lovecraft Country, and Watchmen. Find all the information and past episodes at shatpod.com/TV. And finally, to hang out with us live, follow and subscribe to our Twitch channel, shatpod.com/Twitch, where we play video games, host watch parties, and edit this podcast live. All that being said, Big D, what movie are we reviewing today?
Gene, for some reason, I always love movies that we do that focus on some of our international listeners. We've done a number of Australian films. We've done some British films lately, and I find it's always entertaining to see films that are a little bit different and expose you to some people you don't see every day here in the United States. So I was very excited when one of our great listeners, Mark T., wanted us to go back to 1998 and review the British crime comedy Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
Well, Mark wrote in and said, "Hi, Shat team. I stumbled upon your podcast a few years ago and now listen to every release without fail. I love your analysis of each film you review with your memories intertwined. And with myself being British, I find your perspectives interesting, especially when you review British films. I loved your reviews of The Full Monty and American Werewolf in London, especially when Big D attempts a British accent. It's hilarious. I commissioned Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels as it's a British classic. It's Guy Ritchie's directorial debut, Jason Statham's acting debut, and it also contains many British accents. I'm looking forward to Big D's attempts. I was too young to see the film in cinemas when it was released, but once it was released on VHS, I rented it from the local video shop and I was not disappointed. The storyline was unique and teeming with one-liners. Chill, Winston. Can everyone stop getting shot? If the milk turns out to be sour, I ain't the type of pussy to drink it. And when I searched more information of the cast, I was surprised to learn approximately 17 of the cast had not prior acting experience at all. Vinnie Jones, ex-footballer, Lenny McLean, hard bastard, ex-bouncer. Thank you for your time for reviewing this classic film. It is massively appreciated. And if any of you are over the pond in the Manchester area, I will happily get you a pint. Kind regards, Mark T.
So, Mark, as we are recording this, England is still alive in the World Cup. My beloved Iran is out of the World Cup, and the U.S., oddly enough, is still in. And I was so nervous building up to this recording that your three Lions would be eliminated from World Cup play, and this would be a very awkward recording. So congratulations to you. I hope they're still in when you hear this recording, and our condolences to Wales. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels is a 1998 British crime comedy written and directed by Guy Ritchie, produced by Matthew Vaughn, and starring an ensemble cast featuring Jason Fleming, Dexter Fletcher, Nick Moran, Stephen McIntosh, and Sting, with Vinnie Jones and Jason Statham in their feature film debuts. The story is a heist involving a self-confident young card sharp who loses 500,000 quid to a powerful crime lord in a rigged game of three-card brag. To pay off his debts, he and his friends decide to rob a small-time gang who happen to be operating out of the flat next door. The film brought Ritchie international acclaim and introduced actors Jones, a former Wales international footballer, and Statham, a former diver, to worldwide audiences. With a $1.35 million budget, the film had a box office gross of over $28 million, making it a commercial success. A British television series, Lock, Stock, followed in 2000, running for 7 episodes, including the pilot. So Big D, Ash, we always ask where you were and what your memories are of the movie we're covering. Tonight, it's Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Big D, we'll start with you.
So, Gene, you said it made $28 million, and that was a commercial success, but it wasn't a huge hit, at least when it came out, because I lumped this film in with two others, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, Snatch, and The Boondock Saints. These are movies that people would always say to me, oh, you got to see this. These are so different. These are great films. But I had missed them when they originally came out, so I had assumed that there was something special about them. We reviewed Boondock Saints, which disappointed me. So when Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels came up, it did not disappoint.
Where did people recommend these movies to you? Were you at like a Dropkick Murphys concert at the time? Is that what happened?
Well, this was among other ones, like Manhunter. It was that same crowd.
What?
It was the ones who wanted to just be original and not go with like the big commercial hits.
Well, this movie came out in 98. I saw it in the summer of 99, which was a summer that utterly changed my life. I was already a massive Anglophile. I was a Britpop junkie. And after studying abroad in the UK and returning, I was starved for anything English I could get my hands on. And like you, Big D, it was Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, and it was Snatch. And they took everything I loved about Tarantino movies and added this English layer that I just could not resist. I wanted to dress like these guys. I wanted to talk like these guys. And I was that annoying dude who was quoting Lock, Stock whenever possible.
Yeah, I saw this actually in 99, not when it came out. I saw it with a group of friends randomly at like a sleepover that we had after the Crawfish Festival. If you were from New Orleans, Crawfish Festival is bomb ass, so much fun. It is down in St. Bernard Parish, and it is the cheapest ass festival with the best food. Every dish is required to be like at least 50% crawfish, and it's amazing. And so we would always get drunk and then go back and stay at somebody's house, and we watched this after a random Crawfish Festival. And I loved everything about it. This was one of those movies that like others we've watched and kind of talked about, like Pulp Fiction, like Heathers, like there was just something stylish about it that just was plain like cool. So I felt super cool because I saw it. And for this movie, I like got it for the most part. So I felt like even cooler. I'll be honest with you though, and tell you I've not watched it in years. So I was actually really excited to go back and watch it for the pod because like you, Big D, this movie is lumped in with Snatch, like you said, but the other one for me is not Boondock. The other for me is Trainspotting. So those are the movies that come like in really tight succession for me. I saw Trainspotting, I saw this, and then 2 years later I would see Snatch, and they just all kind of are like this really cool, like British film time for me.
Now, we took some heat when we did Romper Stomper and compared it to American History X, and everybody from abroad in Australia and other places, and even some Americans were like, well, clearly you don't know movies. There are other movies about neo-Nazis. Yes, we also understand there are other movies based in England around this time. We just aren't going to name all of them. These are the ones that are relevant to our lives, and this one was a big one for me.
I agree. And I think there is something about, even though we share a common language, they're very different. Mm-hmm. And there's something so cool. And I don't know if it's because we are Americans and we don't hear it every day, but delivery of this dialogue makes everyone just seem so exotic and unique. And it was entertaining. Like I could not stop smiling watching this film. And the characters, I felt almost like I was watching sci-fi. This was something so foreign to me that it was really enjoyable.
I still get excited when anyone English talks to me. Like Paul in Middlesbrough, he'll message me on Instagram and I'm like, oh, cool.
See, this is like our biggest difference is we were both obsessed with Europe at this point. Just you were British and I was French. Like we were right across the channel from each other. But
yeah, and much like my obsession with like rockabilly in the 90s, as opposed to being obsessed with bands like, Radiohead or being obsessed with bands like the Pixies, now as I get older, the French are looking a lot cooler.
Yeah.
Sorry, England.
Yeah, and Mark, I wish we had been friends earlier on because I've probably talked about my dark youth as a Smith fan and worshiping Morrissey. Manchester would have been a dream for me in the 80s to come up there and to go around town and maybe catch them in the city or maybe catch a concert. That was my dream. I never made it. I made it to London later on. I mean, and Morrissey's still around, even though Gene went to see him. But to see him in Manchester and to see their old stomping grounds would have been something I would have dreamed about.
Yeah, this is Morrissey before we knew he was racist. Or before we knew he was that racist.
I was about to say, hold on.
Let's hit the trailer.
Play cards tonight, son?
Oh, don't be silly, Dad. I wouldn't have anything to do with that.
50 grand. 80 grand.
100 grand.
250.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Four young fellas got in deep with the naked hand. Iron them, torture them, and kill them.
Who are we doing this for?
You're doing it for me. It's all you need to know.
Like one of those James Bond films.
If you have a better idea how to get 500,000 in the next few days, let us know. I'm game.
Makes sense.
And they're armed.
Armed with what?
Bad breath, colourful language.
If the milk turns out to be sour, I ain't the kind of pussycat to drink it.
1, 2.
Do you know what I mean?
We have only got 2 real guns.
Do these work? I feel safer with a chicken drumstick.
This spring,
That's it. Go, 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 timer!
4 friends
The odds are 100 to 1.
have 3 days
If you bend the truth, I'll kill you.
and 2 guns
If you forget anything, I'll kill you.
for 1 shot at greatness.
Now, do you understand everything I've said? Because if you don't, I'll kill you.
Gramercy Pictures presents
I've been shot. Can everyone stop getting shot?
a Guy Ritchie film.
A minute ago, this was the safest job in the world. Now it's turning into a bad day in Bosnia.
Lock, Stock, and 2 Smoking Barrels.
Right, wrap them guns up, count the money, put your seatbelt on.
In London, small-time criminals Eddy, Tom, Soap, and Bacon put together 100,000 quid so that Eddy, a genius card sharp, can buy into one of Hatchet Harry Lonsdale's high-stakes 3-card brag games. The game is rigged, and the friends end up owing Harry 500,000 quid. Harry then sends his debt collector, Big Chris, to ensure that the quartet pay the debt within a week. Harry also orders his enforcer, Barry the Baptist, to hire 2 thieves, Gary and Dean, to steal a pair of antique Holland & Holland shotguns from a bankrupt lord. The 2 unwittingly sell the shotguns to Nick the Greek, a local fence.
So we recently reviewed Romper Stomper and talked about how we thought that the use of labels initially to describe the characters, show us their name, show us almost like it's a player's card, what their special ability is, what they do. And we loved it. I think Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels does it even better. This movie has an unusually large cast of characters. And I think the guy Ritchie, he respects our time. He doesn't waste any time with unnecessary exposition. Boom, we hit the ground running. We're up to speed. He likes to keep it simple. And I struggle with it. Like right now, as we do this podcast, I have what looks like a memory board on the right-hand side, with all of the characters, their faces, their names, the actors, because I get them all confused. And I think we've got all kinds of things going on. A card game, drug dealers, pot growers, a gun robbery. There's a lot going on. And we're up and running within 2 minutes.
I know we're going to get mail on this, and I'm not saying that I agree with this, but just something that happens in movie criticism is a lot of people compare this movie and what Guy Ritchie does here with Tarantino, right? Like you cannot get away from a review where they don't compare the two, especially a movie like Reservoir Dogs. And I think that's where the commonality like immediately comes in for me, is in these introductions, because just like in Tarantino films, he makes these very distinct introductions to who those characters are. And we just reviewed Reservoir Dogs. And so I was thinking so much back to that opening scene where by the end of that opening scene, we knew who those characters were. They were so distinct, but like you're saying, Gene, they're not wonky. You didn't have like the one guy who had like a lazy eye and that was his big thing, right? Or like, you know, a limp, like you have in something like Usual Suspects, which we found out was a lesser movie than we remembered because those characters were so distinct and were so different from each other. And I think that's where those comparisons come in, because both Ritchie in this film and Tarantino in his films, they do such a good job of those character introductions.
I'm glad you broke the Tarantino seal so I didn't have to, but let's talk Tarantino for a second. Mm-hmm. One of the things Tarantino does in all of his movies, from Reservoir Dogs to Inglourious Basterds, is that trademark slick dialogue. And I remember when I saw Lock, Stock in 99, I was like, this dialogue is so fucking slick. But now watching it in 2022, it sounds like it was written by fucking Russell Brand. Like, I like the occasional lingual twist, but holy fuck. Almost none of the characters in this movie could be bothered to just speak straightforward English. It's all, let's stroll up the walkie woo and keep a bookie wook. Come on.
No, come on. I think Tarantino takes himself too serious. Guy Ritchie has more fun with it. And everyone in this movie has a ridiculous nickname. They may be not too outside, let's just say, how different from each other or outlandish, but you got guys named Hatchet Harry, Samoan Joe, Nick the Greek, Dog, Barry the Baptist, Soap, Big Chris, Bacon. They're not going to have a normal, hello, governor, how you doing today? No, they're going to have crazy, outlandish, ridiculous conversations that match the characters.
I have to go kind of with Big D here because I think it really depends. Because let's think about Trainspotting, which again gets heavily compared to this movie and what Danny Boyle does with Trainspotting. And if you've ever read the book, Trainspotting, the book, is almost impossible to get through, at least for me, because the dialect is so out there. It is so different than the type of English we speak here. And I'm not saying it's an inferior English. It's just a much different English than we speak. And so there was some flack that movie took for changing the dialect and making it more accessible to the people that were watching the film, and specifically to American type audiences who had no frame of reference. And so I like and appreciated the fact that Guy Ritchie kept something unique about the dialect here, about the characters and the way that they're kind of being portrayed. And the accents and the dialect were one of the things I remember the most from watching it back in 99, that it added to that cool factor that I talked about. And I do agree with Eugene. In some parts, it is ridiculous. I had to watch with the subtitles. And even with the subtitles, I was like, what the fuck does that mean throughout a lot of the movie? But I still think it's pretty slick because it's really ballsy to just kind of go like all in with that.
I guess I would just sum it up saying that my complaint about this is the same complaint I had about Valley Girl, right? Where it was like, dude, we're in the valley. We're like, yeah, we get it. Fucking not everybody talks like that. Chill.
Well, the other thing that I remembered about this film was a lot of like the language, like the actual like cursing that occurs in this movie. And there was something for those of you that are youngins that are listening to our pod, there was something that happened between the 80s and 90s, which is that the R-rated film changed because before a certain time period, there was no PG-13. So a lot of R-rated films you'll go back and watch from the time periods we review, especially in the 80s, that don't feel like R-rated films. They feel like PG-13 films. And even when like movies became R-rated in the 1990s, it almost felt like they were like in categories. You had like your R-rated film because of sex. And so that was Basic Instinct. You had your R-rated films because of violence, or you had your R-rated films because everybody was saying the F word constantly. But they were like in these silos almost. And I remember seeing this and thinking it was a different type of movie, the same way I felt when I watched a movie that was R, like Reservoir Dogs, which is that it was like an amalgam of all of those things. It was truly like an R film. And I went back and did some research. So they say fuck 120 times in this movie. They say cunt 50 times in this movie. And then there's the violence. There's a lot of violence in this film. So I had this memory of feeling, okay, this is another like real quote unquote R-rated movie that made it even better for me at 16 when I watched it in 1999. Like, okay, this is an adult film.
Until you pointed this out, I thought this movie was kind of silly and non-threatening. I mean, I know there's a crazy body count, but I didn't really think about it. Everything just felt so over the top and goofy that, and compared to like some of the stuff we've been watching, like Natural Born Killers,
sure,
it just felt cute to me.
They show some restraint. Tarantino would have shown the guy's head in the door as he like splits it open like a coconut.
We see a dude get his toes blown off by a shotgun.
Agreed.
Do you really? You see like a bloody nub. You don't see it. Come on. It's cartoonish. There's slow motion. It's done in a stylized way.
Oh, please.
And Guy Ritchie does this. It's fun. He did that famous, I think it was a BMW commercial. He does things with flair. But the big moment in the film, as we're going to get to, is the card game. And this is what sets everything off. And they're going to show us how Hatchet and Bishop, they're spying on them, they're videotaping, they're trying to see what his hand is. Then they're using an electronic device to like signal him on the leg. And it's not drawn out and long, where you don't get to see like a 30-second clip of them talking about it, how it's going to be set up. We don't get this huge like exposition like in Rounders. We don't have to hear Matt Damon's like his inner thoughts, like, I knew before the cards were turned that I'd lost. We don't need that shit. We just get to see what's going on. Eddie's puking. He's walking out. It's bad. But have you guys been following this whole chess controversy?
Yes.
No.
Okay. So, Gene, and to our listeners out there, there's been a big $100 million like defamation lawsuit. There's a young guy, up and coming grandmaster, Hans Naiman. So he's admitted to cheating like in these online games, but then they go to the World Chess Championship and the big dog, Magnus Carlsen, call me out if I'm wrong, he's supposedly like the top dog.
He is, yes.
He gets beat. And he says something's up here. Something's wrong. There's no way this young kid has risen so fast. And they run all of his game moves against some algorithm. And they find out like his moves are like 95% perfect, like the optimal move in every situation. So they know he's cheating, but they check you at the door and they wand you. There is now a rumor going around that he's using a butt plug or anal beads, and someone is signaling him the moves from the crowd or online. So this is taking Hatchet and Bishop's plan to the next level. I guess if you want to win, you do anything, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is where you get those weird rules in the book. Like no butt plugs.
Or how do you check for him?
Anal beads.
They wanded him when he came back in, but do you like really, how do you?
Have you ever, butt plugs aren't all made of metal.
You would think that, first of all, yes, but you would think that they could just use like hand signals. You know?
No, because
it's a little bit easier.
No, well, that's going to tip it off. It's not like that show Who Wants to Be a Millionaire where the guy was like, and then it was the second answer.
I'm really confused, though. They think it was a butt plug, I get, but anal beads?
I think maybe it was a vibrating. Maybe there was multiple pulses. It was a way to do.
It feels like that's excessive.
Oh, like if the beads were a grid inside your body, that it's exactly out of the chessboard.
But there's no way you could feel like all five independently.
You got to do some training. There's got to be some training involved.
I've had some nights.
That would be that'd be more impressive than like cheating in the chess tournament, I have to say. That's real life skill.
Gene's like, Queen to Rook's 7. Once again, Grandmaster Gene. Oh, what a terrible move. We don't know what's going on. His game is going downhill.
Why the fuck do people do this kind of gambling? Like, I understand gambling isn't legal everywhere. I can't see how anyone would walk into a secret card game on their opponent's turf. Like the guy who hosts you is also playing in the game and you're gambling that much money because you know you don't have any legal recourse. Like if shit goes sideways, they could literally just take your money and kick you out. Like that's all they would have to do. I don't know why they went through all the trouble of cheating. It's way too risky.
So I watched this before Thanksgiving, and then the day after Thanksgiving, I go every year to a Black Friday like poker tournament. And so I went to this Black Friday poker tournament, and it's at somebody's house. And this is what I kept thinking about is even there where the buy-in's like $100 a person. Yeah. I'm like, there's no way that I would come in here and cheat because I'm not worried about like the legal recourse. I'm worried about getting caught and like getting like my ass beat, even at my friend's house, much less a place like this. Like I just think it's fucking stupid.
Question for you both. I was in a game of left, center, right the other night and $3 buy-in. We're all drinking. Everybody's having a good time. There's a taco bar. I'm watching the person 2 seats to my left and they would set the die a certain way in their hand before they rolled it. They would use their other hand, like their right hand, to set it in their left hand, then close their hand and then roll it. Do you call that shit out?
Call it out.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. See, so I had to do a personality strength test at work, which made me feel really bad about myself because number one, like trait for me was competition, that I win at all costs. And I can't stand when people break the rules because like, I'm going to fucking win. Right. Fun fact, 25, the last one was empathy. So that made me feel really shitty. But number one was competition. And that's like, if I'm in this situation, even if I know the person, even if it's like the person I came with or like my significant other, I'm like, stop fucking cheating.
Yeah. It's my moral obligation. At least embarrass the person. Call him out. Yeah, I mean, you need a pit boss clearly because what he's doing is he's sliding the dice. You do the hand move, you're sliding it. That's I don't care if it's a $3 buy-in, 50-cent buy-in, or $100 buy-in. You call that shit out.
I don't care if there's no money.
No, you slap him.
I'm gonna win, but I'm gonna win legitimately.
Big D, it was a she. Does that make a difference?
Yes. No, I mean no.
No, you find a girl to slap her. No, you tell her to stop. Not okay in my book.
Eddy returns home one day and overhears his neighbors, a gang of robbers led by a brutal man named Dog, planning a heist on some cannabis growers. Eddy's crew decides to rob the robbers as they return from their heist. Tom visits Nick the Greek to buy weapons and ends up buying the 2 antique shotguns. Despite a gang member being killed by his own gun and an encounter with a traffic warden, the robbers return home with money and a van full of weed. Eddy and his friends ambush them and fence the drugs to violent gangster Rory Breaker. 2 of Rory's men visit the house of the cannabis growers and discover the cannabis he just bought had been stolen from his own growers. Rory threatens Nick into giving him Eddy's address and tasks one of the growers, Winston, to identify the robbers. The late 90s introduced American audiences to another side of the UK. We left the posh areas of London that we'd seen in the 70s, 80s, even the 60s. We saw the full Monty. We saw Sheffield. We saw Manchester in East is East. Instead of Buckingham Palace and the dazzling London skyline, Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels, which is set in London, it gave us a much grittier view of England. What's funny is it was actually filmed in Borough Market, which is basically tourist central. It's right around the corner from Parliament. But they made the effort to capture more of like an East London vibe, to make it sort of gritty and streetsy. And all you see is cab drivers and people hanging out in pubs and pulling off crimes.
Yeah, there is like a color filter I think they use. And as an American, I always heard, oh, it's rainy and gray continuously in London. I didn't believe it until I went there. And yes, I saw the sun for about 45 minutes. But the film feels very England, very London, very blue collar. I didn't think it was too crazy. It was what I imagined that this world in London would be like.
Yeah, I think that this movie kind of joins others. Like you already mentioned Full Monty, we've got Trainspotting and showing us what like the rest of the UK look like. And I think that this is a thing that movies, like they don't do well here in the States. Like even I remember New York City. The first time I went to go see New York City when I was a kid, I had no idea it was more than just Times Square. Like I thought like that was New York City, or, like LA was just underneath the Hollywood sign. Like we're not very good at showing where people like actually live. We only show about 5% of the city, and it's this whole tourist thing. And I think that's why Americans like have a lot of trouble traveling abroad, because they go abroad to these places and they think that London is just like all crumpets and like Big Ben. And when I moved to Paris for the first time, like I remember like when people would come to visit, they would think all Paris was just like on the sea line, like just where like the Arc de Triomphe, like all the way down to the, just seeing like the Eiffel Tower and like the Louvre and all of that. That's what they thought Paris was. Or in Rome, like that people actually live outside of the main parts with the piazzas. People don't live like next to the fountains, right? And that's something Americans just don't get. And I love that about a lot of British cinema, especially the British cinema that we've done lately, is they show like actual places and these actual time periods, and they wind up being these really cool time capsules, I feel like, because it isn't necessarily gritty as much as it is like a lot more realistic than the other shit that we see that's so sanitized.
Hey, the film, it feels authentic. And I think it's not just the sets where they film, but it's the cast. We did Blue Velvet recently, and I commented on Frank Booth as a villain. To me, he's not scary. He's got a gang of misfits. They don't seem like they could actually... Sure, there's rumors that Frank killed people. He cut off an ear. I wasn't afraid of him. Lock, Stock, on the other hand, they managed to make all of these criminals to varying degrees scary and honestly believable. I believe that Harry would beat a man to death with a 15-inch rubber black cock. That's believable to me. And it's because these actors, they went out and got not just actors and said, okay, you're going to act tough. These were legitimate tough guys. You got Lenny McLean, who played Barry the Baptist. He was an unlicensed boxer, bouncer, bodyguard. He became a businessman. He was known as the governor. He was the king of the cobbles. He was one of the hardest men in Britain. And in his autobiography, he said that he had between 2,000 and 3,000 fights. He was a big dude, 6'2", weighed about 280. Then you got Vinnie Jones, who's Big Chris. He was a professional footballer. He played, and I think he was the captain of the Welsh team. He was a badass dude. And there's a genuine, when somebody knows how to use their hands and how to like physically beat someone, it's so much more real than watching, say, Christian Bale try to act like a tough guy or Joe Pesci. There's an authenticity from beating someone else's ass that comes across on screen.
I was really worried above all else that Vinnie Jones's scenes were not going to hold up in this movie. And upon rewatch, he was surprisingly good in this. It holds up. He's so menacing, but he's so controlled with little Chris right next to him. He won't even handle a gun. He's like, no, I'm not into that, right? And clearly, as I'm watching this, I'm like, this guy is a prototype for Roy Kent from Ted Lasso. Like, absolutely. And yes, I know Roy Kent is an homage to Roy Keane, another famous footballer, but I'm talking about the character build. This character of being like the big, brooding, like hard man, but he's kind of got a sense of propriety. Definitely not back to Big Chris. And Big D, you were talking about all these guys who know how to use their hands, these guys who have been through some shit. And Vinny Jones, if you guys haven't seen, go back and look at photos of him playing soccer. The damage this guy's body took and the damage that he dished out was pretty serious. As a person who's been knocked out, I've always wondered how movies get away with the trope of the long knockout. And we saw it in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Like, dudes get punched in the face. They wake up hours later. Lock, Stock takes advantage of it by allowing Dog and his boys to knock out that traffic warden. And then the running joke is that traffic warden is just in the van, for the rest of the heist and for like an hour later. We see Eddy's crew try to knock him out as he comes back too. And they're doing like repeated blows to his head and nobody can knock him out. And playing with movie cliches like that, it's so smart. It's something that the 90s were kind of known for, is disassembling all the things that we saw in the 70s and 80s and even the 60s that we just took to be what happens in the movies. You get hit in the head, you're going to be out for an hour.
So, Gene, one of the benefits I've gotten from this podcast and all this time was your knowledge that you have shared with us about combat, different types of martial arts, how to defend. And you early on talked about the way you knock somebody out. And I went back and I wanted to look at this because it's always one of those tropes, like the one punch, you knock the guy out. So I found some research they'd done, and you had taught me this a while ago. In a fight, don't talk shit. You don't want to be the king bee and get your jaw broken. You keep your jaw closed and you keep your hands up on the side of your face to block the side punches. And you're 100% correct. The hook, the lateral punch, it knocks you out because it snaps your head. Your brain actually slams into your skull and you black out. Whereas an uppercut or a straight punch, they're not going to knock somebody out. So if you want to knock somebody out, folks out there, you don't knock anybody out. But if just say you were in a movie and you want to make it realistic, you got to get that side lateral head movement because that's what's going to do the job.
Is that what causes your jaw to be broken? Is that you're talking?
Yes. Well, it helps. It helps reinforce it because King B was running his mouth. He took one punch and then he's calling for a cab to go home and Gene's making him soup for the next 2 months.
But if your mouth is closed, then you won't.
Yeah, just think it's like a mouthpiece.
It's much, much less of a chance. It's the same thing with like the mouthpiece. Yeah, a lot of people think the mouthpiece is there to like protect your teeth. It's really there to protect your jaw and also like the inside of your mouth from your teeth because that's much less worse. The likelihood of getting your teeth knocked out is much lower than the likelihood of cutting yourself or getting your jaw broken. Before we get into actually too, an uppercut is also highly effective at knocking a person out. So right on the button, it still moves the chin, causes that concussion that's gonna cause the knockout. But yeah, a hook is devastating.
See, I've never been knocked out from a fight because I've never been in a fight. But both of the times that I have been knocked unconscious, which was an unfortunate accident in Tuscany and then an unfortunate bubble accident, both of those times I came to within literally like a minute the first time and maybe 2 minutes the second time. And I've always thought that was so strange that like you get knocked out and like you come to like an hour and a half later. I mean, I would assume that person was just dead.
I mean, Ash, if you were out for a minute, that's a severe concussion.
So the bubble accident, it was a severe concussion and I had to have 4 different MRIs and it was a whole thing. And I had to like live in a dark room for like a month. I feel like it was honestly the worst thing I have ever been through. And it was because of fucking bubbles, but it was fine.
What is a bubble accident?
Finn spilled bubbles on our floor and we had like super dark wood. So you couldn't see liquid on the floor. Like it was like invisible. And so I was walking and my foot just hit it right. And it was like a movie scene. Like my feet went out from underneath me, flew in the air. I broke my elbow in the fall too. Cause I came down on my head and my elbow, the back of my head and my elbow. And like, they thought I had a skull fracture. Like, I mean, it was really, really bad. Really bad. And what's crazy is I don't remember anything from about 3 hours before the accident. And I don't remember about 6 hours afterwards. Like I have total amnesia from that 9 hours.
Those of you listening at home, like a normal knockout would be somewhere in the range of like 10 seconds. And that's a pretty long one. So a minute is like you are fucked up.
Yeah, it was really, really bad.
I only got knocked out once. It was in 8th grade. It was a baseball bat. I was on the on-deck circle, standing there warming up. Next second, I knew I was on the ground, and the coach was like, "Hey, you okay? You okay?" The guy had swung, let the bat go, and it just traveled, got me right in the side of the head.
Shit.
And back then, you didn't go get an MRI or a CAT scan. I think that might explain some of my issues today.
You didn't get knocked out a single time as Army Airborne?
No, I fucked up my legs, but I never get knocked out.
I guess that makes sense. You land on your legs, not your head.
Yeah.
I always imagine like you're jumping out of a plane and I don't know, something bonks you.
The object, Gene, the object is to not land on your head. Just all your novice skydivers and parachutists out there, don't land on your head.
Fucking 7-foot tall lawn dart. Eddie and his friends celebrate at his father JD's bar. Dog's crew learns that their neighbors robbed them and they set up an ambush in Eddie's flat. Rory and his gang arrive instead, and in an ensuing shootout, all except Dog and Winston are killed. Winston leaves with the drugs, while Dog leaves with the 2 shotguns and the money. But Big Chris incapacitates him and takes everything. Gary and Dean, having learned who bought the shotguns, follow Chris to Harry's place, unaware of the latter pair's relationship.
This movie is categorized as a crime comedy. And for me, I think it's so much more entertaining than a traditional heist film. The Ocean's 11 and all of like where you're going to get people like outsmarting the tech and, we're going to go through the lasers and we're going to, count till 10 and the guard's now going around the corner. To me, that shit, it's boring. Here, you got Eddie, Tom, Soap, and Bacon. They're small-time criminals. They're inept. And the movie works because they are blissfully unaware of the real danger that surrounds them. And the comical situations that they underestimate every step in this movie, they're bumbling. That makes it entertaining to me. And I was so glad that there wasn't some, at the last moment where they were going to come together and figure out a way to actually be proficient criminals, that they were going to figure out a way to set up all these different parties in a way that would get them out of being responsible and away with the money. So the way that the film goes with them being fools to the end and everything being blind luck is so much better than these guys actually turning out to be good criminals.
But thankfully, they do balance it out a little bit because that robbery of Dog's gang, it was pretty slick. I mean, Soap had the knives and stuff. It was funny, but I think the movie needed to give them that win so they didn't just look like bumbling dipshits all the time. It was a clever balance. It was fun to see them get one win.
I agree. And I think the problem here would have been if they were just like these insane criminals, like what you're talking about, like Ocean's 11. I was thinking more like The Italian Job, that disaster of a film with Mark Wahlberg, right? Yeah. Where like they, fuck over Ed Norton after he kills Donald Sutherland randomly. Spoiler alert. What I liked about this film is this is what I feel like a lot of people who are lifelong criminals actually are like, in the sense that they bumble through 90% of the shit and just get lucky. And then every now and again have like a really thought out thing, but these aren't criminal masterminds. And I found that was really charming about them. I thought these guys wound up being really charming because of their failures. And like you said, Gene, like you celebrate it for them when they actually get something in like they do here, with this one robbery.
It sets up this fun atmosphere where anything can happen, any joke is allowed, and things just surprise you constantly. And Guy Ritchie's ability to bring jokes full circle is absolutely brilliant. It's something that I had forgotten going into this movie. He does it at least 3 times in Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. It starts with Nick the Greek getting a phone that looks like a large McDonald's fries, and it seems like such a random thing for him to be offered when he's going to buy the stereo. But every time he answers the phone, the situation is increasingly stressful, and it's always that phone, so it makes you laugh. Then when they go to Samoan Joe's next door to the card game, this guy just comes out of the front door and he's on fire. And like, okay, that's random. And I thought that was the joke. Later in the movie, like a half hour later, you learn that Rory set him on fire over a TV dispute. The best one is, Tom setting up that elaborate reel-to-reel recording contraption in the closet. Like we've already established, you could just stand in Eddie's closet and hear Dog's gang next door. But for some reason, Tom has to have these 4 microphones. There's a reel-to-reel recorder, and he's got the headphones on as he's listening in. It's only there to set up Dog's crew discovering who robbed them based on looking around in the closet and seeing this giant fucking contraption. It's brilliant.
But it was about this point in the film that I started really thinking about the plot. And this is where I think this podcast is really difficult. A lot of our listeners, they're like, you need to remember what it was like to watch it in 99. But the problem is I'm now watching it in 2022. And what I remember about watching it in 99 was that the plot was complex. For some reason, that's something I thought. I thought this was a movie that kind of was almost highbrow and maybe it's because it was British. I don't know. But that was the memory that I had about it. But upon rewatch, it started to feel almost hollow in places and slightly confusing in others. And I want to say this about it. Guy Ritchie, I think maybe better than anyone else we've looked at editing. The way he edits films is slick. The way that he edits films is brilliant. But the plot isn't the editing. And the plot itself, it just felt like there were bits of it that were kind of meandering. Other parts, the best way I can describe is it felt like shapeless almost. And I wasn't expecting that because I remember this being a great plot in 99, but what it was like in 2022 was a well edited plot, like in terms of like the actual film itself. Like, am I alone in that?
No, I think shapeless is the word. I thought it was well composed. As you said, it was well edited. There were a lot of good bits in there, but he was so concerned with getting in all the bits that he didn't quite get the flow right. It was shapeless. And it's another thing that Snatch improved upon. It felt like it had a little more structure. The plot was a little more straightforward. It made a lot more sense while still retaining that tight editing and that comedy. Well, Chris delivers the money and guns to Harry. Upon returning to his car, he finds Dog holding his son, Little Chris, at knife point, demanding the money be returned to him. Chris complies and starts the car. Gary and Dean burst into Harry's office, and the ensuing confrontation results in their deaths, along with Harry's and Barry's. Returning to see the carnage at their flat and their loot missing, Eddy and his friends head to Harry's. Upon discovering Harry's corpse, they decide to take the money for themselves. Chris crashes into their car to disable Dog and then bludgeons him to death with his car door. He then takes the debt money back from the unconscious friends, but allows Tom to leave with the antique shotguns after a brief standoff in Harry's office. I complained on Ash's Commission Magnolia episode that too many divergent threads magically connected in the end. I don't like that. It's really hard to pull off anything in a non-fantasy setting that has that many threads converging. But comedies are a whole different story. Watching the storylines all converge in lock stock put a smile on my face, particularly seeing the reactions as different characters had to make sense of the situations they were walking into. Like when Big Chris finds Dog in the street with the loot, and it's utterly confusing, but he just reacts by the headbutt. He takes the shit. Thank you very much. And I'm going back to my boss.
Yeah, but I think it's because like Magnolia, they hide some of the connections that the characters have. It is a perfect storm of multiple storylines that head towards the end, but nobody is secret. Nobody has a relationship. There's no plot reveal. Guy Ritchie tells us everything that's going on. So there's no mystery at the end, like, oh no, Big Chris was really, the bishop's son. It wasn't like that. It was, we got to see how the hell are these, because we know the idiots are going to get out of it. How is it going to be set up that they can actually walk away with their lives, all their fingers, and possibly loot?
I think, though, why this is such a great point that you're making here, Gene, is because so many films have tried to do those divergent threads. And when they're not done correctly, it becomes like impossible to watch. I recently watched a show that is British. It's done by a British, director and writer. It's a group that did some of the Doctor Who's, and it stars a former Doctor Who and David Tennant. It's called Inside Man. And this show is exactly what you're talking about, where it's all of these different characters. Some are in England, some are in America, and somehow at the end they all converge, and it makes absolutely no sense. And I loved watching that in conjunction with watching this because it made me appreciate the way that he ties up these loose ends here, because otherwise it could be a disaster. Like, again, spoiler alert, Inside Man, none of you should watch.
Does it involve chess and a butt plug?
It does not. Then I would have enjoyed it. Anal beads would have been too much.
Agreed.
I do want to say, though, I talked a little bit about the plot and how it felt a little shapeless. And the plot also kind of started to drag for me a little bit here, which is super ironic because it makes no sense, because much of the violence really happens in the second half. So you would assume that, like, I would kind of be into it. But it felt a little draggy here and there. But I do want to point out the violence is crazy in this movie. This is another reason why it gets compared to Tarantino, because the violence is not straightforward. It's fairly unique. I mean, yes, there's guns, there's knives, but there's like gardening equipment and car doors and golf stuff, all that yield violence. But even with all of that, it still felt a little slow, which was a big bummer, again, because I remembered it being super fast paced. And I started looking at the clock about this time.
I wonder if that goes back to what Big D was talking about, though. This was all predictable. Like, once all the pieces were in place, every move was already telegraphed. Yeah. There weren't any twists at this point in the movie. There's nothing new to be discovered. It was like being on a cruise ship. We're having fun, but it's impossible to change course. We already know where we're going to end up, which port we're going into.
That's absolutely brilliant, actually, I think. I think I may change my wipe score just because of that metaphor that you just used. Because this is that, right? Like, cruises are fine. Cruises are fun. Cruises are a good time if you're with the right people, but they're super predictable. And maybe I'm being harsh, right? Maybe I'm being harsh because I can predict it. Maybe I couldn't predict it in 99. I don't know. Maybe we've just watched too many fucking movies by this point.
To me, the only thing that was completely out of left field and not predictable is that Big Chris, with a knife at his son's throat, would choose to crash his car. To me, I was like, that might be a bad move and get your son's head cut off. But it was still entertaining because he then goes and beats the shit out of the guy with it's all fun violence.
Mm-hmm.
The friends are arrested, but soon acquitted after the traffic warden identifies Dog and his crew as the culprits. Back at the bar, they dispatch Tom to dispose of the antique shotguns, the only remaining evidence linking them to the case. Chris then arrives to give back the duffel bag, from which he has taken all the money for himself and his son, and which now contains a catalog of antique weapons. Leafing through the catalog, the friends learn that the shotguns are actually quite valuable, and they quickly call Tom to stop him from disposing of the guns. The film ends with Tom leaning over a bridge with his mobile phone in his mouth and ringing as he prepares to drop the shotguns into the River Thames.
Okay, so prepare yourself, 1-star reviewers, because the woman on the podcast is about to talk about women. And I have to say, a common critique of this movie is that there's not enough women in it. And I read some reviews preparing to go watch it, and I was like, no way. There's definitely like a woman in this film. There are no fucking women in this film. Like, there really are not. And what's interesting about it is that the men are like really one note. And that's another critique. Like, they threaten, they banter. They threaten with banter, they banter and then they yell, or sometimes they just yell. And at this point, like, the characters almost become one-dimensional to like almost like a point of confusion for me, because Guy Ritchie is not one-dimensional. And I remember them being a bit more than this, but like they kind of like aren't. And again, I'm not saying that's not okay. Just like the plot being predictable, that's fine. I don't need the plot to not be predictable. But I get now why this is a big part of those essays I was reading about this movie that, 23 years later or 24 years later, it's like, like there were no women at all in this movie.
I was a long-time FHM subscriber, and the FHM from the UK, not the US version of it, because, And as it would arrive, you would get a special issue every like year or so that was the Book of Bloke. And it was just stuff that stuff that guys like. And this movie is like a film version of the Book of Bloke. As you said, Ash, it's banter, threatening with banter. And I never noticed the lack of women in this movie. And it's not a big deal. But I'm sure if there were a movie with no men, I would notice that. And the only thing I could say is thank God they spared us some like side plot with like Eddie's girlfriend who was trying to get him to behave and not be with his friends. And she was a real drag.
That would have been worse than having no women. But before we get in, I do want to point, there is one woman, but she doesn't speak.
Oh, but hold on. She's badass.
But she doesn't speak.
She lays down some serious lead. She is just like busting. She just shoots up the room. She goes crazy. She snaps out of her like comatose state. And granted, she couldn't hit shit, but she was a badass.
Actually, there were two women in this movie. There was also the lady that was running the card game, and she spoke.
But not like real lines.
She laid down the rules for 3-card brag.
And she throws out that dude who's like jumping on the table. But we complain all the time about the gratuitous use of slow motion and montages. Both I loved in this. When the slow motion breaks out, whether it's Gloria shooting up the room or the other gun battles, it's done in a fun way. It's not tried to heighten the action and to make us like really focus. It's done for comedy. And the montage that we get about everyone spending about 45 seconds loading their guns, they were done in a fun way. And movies should be fun. Not everything should be taken so seriously.
Agreed.
Ash, when we did Natural Born Killers, you told us about that alternate ending. And I've been obsessed with this idea now of knowing, was there anything that got cut from the movie that we watched that would make a difference? The whole time I'm watching Lock, Stock, there's this narrator. And I'm thinking they're going to reveal it at the end, right? Is it Eddie as an old man thinking back on his life? Is it a cop who's watching the whole thing go down who's going to bust him at the end? And then I realized the voice is Alan Ford, who only appears on screen for a few minutes with scant lines in this movie. And if you've seen Snatch, you know what he's capable of. In Snatch, he was Bricktop. He's an absolutely phenomenal villain, infinitely quotable. But it seemed weird to me just have him as a narrator in this movie when he didn't really play a role in the movie. And it turns out he had this great scene that got cut. It's terrific. It explains why Hatchet Harry has such a boner for Eddy, why he wants Eddie's dad's bar. And I can't believe they removed it. Guys, if you get a chance out there listening and you watch this movie, also watch that deleted scene. You can see it on YouTube. It's absolutely fantastic.
But I need to ask you guys a question here as we get to the end of the podcast and the end of the movie. These guys, as we discussed, are idiots, and they've done everything wrong. We learned in Goodfellas, you don't celebrate. When you get the heist, you don't act like something has changed. These guys are getting drunk. They're throwing money around, and that's why they get their stuff stolen. We get to the end here now, and they realize all of a sudden that they've tried to get rid of the only thing that could tie them to all of these murders, these crimes, are the shotguns. They find out the value. They now want to save them. You can't fence these things. These are the last pieces of evidence in a string of robberies and shootings and drugs. Would you keep the guns at this point? Or would you say, throw those things in the water, let's walk away?
I mean, if I lived the life that these guys were living in that apartment, having to do the kind of heist that we've been doing, yeah, I would absolutely try to fence those guns. You got enough connections. You got Nick the Greek. He can take care of you.
I think Nick the Greek is done with these guys. If he's smart, he's done with these idiots.
Me, no. As a character in this, I mean, yeah. I mean, it makes sense that they want to keep him. But me, no. Make me nervous. Evidence makes me nervous.
I thought you were going to ask the question, does Tom throw them in the water?
I think he probably zoinks. He falls in the water with the cell phone, with everything. He tries to save it, or he falls in and the guns are there and the police come walking by. The ending's unimportant because these idiots are just going to get into another situation, and more than likely it's not going to end well.
Well, that brings us to the time for our Shat score. The Shat score is our way of telling you how many wipes this movie takes to get off respective butts. 0 wipes is a perfect movie. It has taken the boys and the one lady out for a nice night out in a Samoan pub. 5 wipes is an absolute disaster of a movie. It is being beaten to death by a Hatchet Harry dildo. We'll start with you, Big D. What is your wipe score for Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels?
Now, this might be because of my affinity for England and for just the poetic way that the language flows and the dialogue. Anyone, these characters can say fuck, and it sounds beautiful. It sounds so much more eloquent than when we say it here in the States. So I found the cast was endearing. I liked them. They were all eclectic. They were different. They were genuine. And I was surprised at how many, this was their first acting, including Vinnie Jones. These guys were great. I think the plot, it was often predictable, but that was the idea. We're a passive viewer. We're not trying to Westworld and figure out what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen. Let's just watch it unfold. So I think the movie was fast-paced, and most importantly, it was fun. I found myself watching this with Vanessa was sitting in the room, and as all hell's breaking loose, I just kept laughing. Oh, no, as each of the bumbling situations unfolded. So for me, really enjoyable. Really, really enjoyable. It's a one wipe.
When we did Arthur, I felt like Arthur was an American film for the English. Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels felt like an English film for Americans. Everything felt played up, a little overboard, but it was fun. And it gave us a glimpse into what Guy Ritchie could really do later. It's not Snatch. Snatch is a much, much better movie. Mm-hmm. But I enjoyed myself. And any movie with the Stooges and James Brown on the soundtrack is good with me. Despite violence against an Arsenal fan, I'm going to give it 1.5 wipes.
So I really struggled with my wipe score for this one because I used to love this film a lot more than I liked it upon rewatch, but that doesn't mean I don't think it's a good movie. So I went and just kind of read some stuff, and this guy reviewed it for The Guardian. He reviewed it like 15 years later, and there's a quote here that I want to read that I think sums it up. He says, "It's a coked up monument to late 90s British hubris. It is to Tarantino what Oasis were to the Beatles." And I think this is perfect, because here's the deal. I fucking love Oasis. I think they're a great band, but they're not the Beatles, right? And I fucking love Tarantino a lot more than I like Guy Ritchie. But that doesn't mean I don't like Guy Ritchie. And it doesn't mean that Guy Ritchie isn't awesome. I originally was going to give this an average score of 2.5 because I was like, there's nothing wrong with being average. But that's wrong because, Gene, you kind of helped me see that with your whole cruise ship metaphor. Like, I think that that's the truth, right? Like, it's okay. And it's okay for it to be enjoyable. But I don't think it's in the upper echelon of films. And a lot of that, and I know this is unfair, but it's better stuff came along. Snatch, as you're saying, is a much better film than this. And so just like I think Pulp Fiction is perfect, but Reservoir Dogs is still really fucking great, it's the same thing here for Guy Ritchie. I think that Snatch is an almost perfect film, but this one's still pretty fucking good. So I'm going to give it what I think is still a great score, which is a 2 wipe.
And before anybody writes in, we will note that Snatch had like 5 times the budget of this film.
Absolutely.
But we don't review budgets. We review the actual movie. So with 2 wipes from Ash, 1.5 wipes from me, and 1 wipe from Big D, that gives us an average wipe score of 1.5 wipes for Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels.
So, Gene, that now ties this film in the 92 spot with a bunch of movies. The Thing, Scrooged, Spaceballs, Friday the 13th, Galaxy Quest, UHF, Scarface, Magnolia, Stand By Me, The Naked Gun, and 3 O'Clock High.
That feels so good. That feels really, really right.
As far as comedies go, those are some elites up there.
Yeah, 1.5 is a great score for this. The system worked this time.
Agreed.
And before we close out, we've got voicemail coming in from listeners. Thank you, everybody who's leaving us voicemail. Just go to shatpod.com and use the SpeakPipe feature. You can use it on any device. We love to hear your voices. And keep those emails coming in. We promise we'll get to them. And this voicemail comes from Daniel in Australia.
Hey, guys. Fucking love you guys. Seriously, you're all dead set champions. Just fucking legendary.
See, language is great.
But I feel a bit bad that I haven't thanked you guys before, because I've been here since the start in 2016. I come across your podcast when I was searching something about the movie Weird Science. And it just happened that you guys were reviewing it that week. And I listened and I was hooked. But back then you guys had the voting system. And then around the same time that you swapped to commissioning, I began a degree in medicine. I've been there 5 years. I got 2 to go. And then I'm going to do some commissioning. So you cunts had better still be around. So it fucking sucks because I desperately wanted to commission a month's worth of Aussie movies. I got some beauties in mind, especially for you, Big D. I want to show you what Aussie fuck yeah movies are, because we do have them. All right, I better get to the point of this message. Anyway, I just wanted to educate you guys on a couple of points and how things are said, because as much as I fucking love you guys, I got to say, you got a bunch of people who are cringing at the naming of a few things. So I'm going to give you all a couple of lessons in Aussie vocabulary. Not that I'm trying to get you to use the accent, just get the naming of a few things right.
Okay.
So we'll start with the big one, Aussie. We are Aussies, not Arsies. You know Ozzy Osbourne? It's exactly like that. Spell it with a Z, mate, or Z's, as you Seppos call them. Say it with me. Aussie.
Aussie.
Aussies.
Easy, mate.
Aussies.
Okay. Next one. Melbourne.
Ooh.
It's not Melbourne. It's Melbourne.
Yeah.
All right. I'll break it up for you into 2 parts. First part, Mel, as in Mel Gibson. And the second part is just bin. B-N. No vowels, no R sound, just bin. Melbourne. Put them together, Melbourne. See, we're super good at being slack with our words. Most of the shit we just cut out. Just get rid of it, mate. So, another one that really fucking grates on us.
Uh-oh.
Emu. Please, don't fucking say emu. Don't say it like that. It's emu, as in me and you. You. You just swap the E and the M of me around. You. All right. I was going to teach you how to say Canberra, but time's running out. And anyway, fuck Canberra. All right. Thanks heaps, guys. Fucking love yous. See ya.
Well, Gene, I guess he called back. But before we get to that, Melbourne is a town, or it's a city in Florida as well. If I walk around being like, hey, everybody, you go to Melbourne, I'm going to get slapped.
Well, that's how you tell the two apart. There's Melbourne and there's Melbourne. It's like in Ohio, when I lived there was RUSSIA, which clearly is Russia, but in Ohio, it's Rushi.
And I'm going to try not to never say emu. I'm just never going to say the word. I won't even talk about the animals.
Yeah, surprisingly, Daniel, emus don't come up that often. in conversation out here.
I think he's going to commission movies that have at least one or two of the animals in each film. And then Daniel called back, and I'm even scared to hear what his second call is about.
Just to follow up to the last message, just wanted to apologise for all the swearing. I think I just use the F word when I'm a bit excited or nervous or whatever. But yeah, cheers. Sorry about that. See ya.
Well, thanks, Daniel, so much for calling in, and good luck to your Socceroos. But at the time that this podcast comes out, they'll already have played Argentina in the knockout round, and best of luck to them. I hope they kick some ass. Again, if you'd like to leave us a voicemail, just go to shatpod.com, use the SpeakPipe feature. Big D, what do we have coming up next week?
Gene, next week, in his second screen adventure, British super spy Austin Powers must return to 1969 as arch nemesis Dr. Evil has ventured back to the year and successfully stolen Austin's mojo and set up a powerful laser that he's aimed at the Earth. With the help of a gorgeous agent, Felicity Shagwell, the newly single Austin must now not only contend with Dr. Evil, but also evil, vicious, pint-sized attack clone Mini-Me. Commissioned by Steve W., released in 1999. And for those of you wondering, yes, this is part 2, the second film in the series.
Back-to-back English cinema. Lucky us. Well, thank you to all the commissioners who make this podcast possible. That concludes this week's episode of Shat the Movies. Be sure to follow us on social media and share with a friend. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Snapchat, and Instagram at Shat the Movies. You can email us at host@shatthemovies.com. Support the podcast by shopping our Amazon affiliate link, buying our merch for Christmas, or commissioning your own movie. Find all information by visiting our website, shatpod.com. Also, check out our sister podcast, Shat on TV, where we review TV series such as Lovecraft Country, Westworld, True Detective, Taboo, American Gods, Game of Thrones, and Watchmen. Find all the information on our website, shatpod.com/TV, wherever fine podcasts can be found, including Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe. And if you stop by Apple Podcasts, please leave a 5-star review. That helps the podcast grow. On behalf of my co-host, Ash and Big D, I'm Gene Lyons. Join us next week for the following movie.
Do you swing?
Are you kidding, baby? I put the gar in swinger, baby, yeah!
Austin Powers.
Crazy, baby, yeah!
Is back.
Yeah, baby, yeah!
With the help of the beautiful Felicity Shagwell.
How does that feel, baby?
Lower.
How does that feel, baby?
In a thrilling adventure of intrigue, treachery, love. But Dr. Evil is back, and more evil than ever.
I'm gonna cry, huh? Oh, yeah. I'm going to go back to the 60s and steal Austin Powers' mojo. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm about to travel through time. I bid you adieu.
A bombshell with a secret. Robin Swallows.
Swallows. That's an interesting name.
Maiden name Spitz.
Well, which is it, baby? Spitz or swallows?
Dr. Evil, we began a program to clone you. He is exactly like you in every way. 1/8 your size.
I shall call him Mini-Me.
Mini-Me. Something small, something deadly. Mike Myers. Mike Myers.
What are you, some kind of freak?
You mother...
Heather Graham.
Move over, Rover. This chick is taking over.
And Mike Myers.
Surprise, surprise!
In the biggest Austin Powers adventure yet. Austin Powers, the spy who shagged me.
Great plan, Einstein. All right, zip it. You can't... Zip. It's simple. Subtitle. Zip it. Found. This... You know...
Can I say cunt?
Of course.
Okay.